something really important because it is the way that people express themselves in various areas. For example, by doing music, by making movies, by paintings and sculptures, etc. But today, in this proposition, we believe that the money which this house spends on funding such art should be stopped because, first of all, if we stop public funding of such of the arts, uh, there there will still be an opportunity for art to develop because, first of all, um, companies, I mean the private sector, will still invest in different artists, and it is actually part of the status quo right now because companies today also invest in different artists, for example, singers and anchors, etc. But we believe that if we stop state funding, there will be no significant changes in the way that art developed. But
Point, madam.
no, thank you. But it will be even great, the situation will be even better because today singers such as Rihanna and Beyonce, they get paid from what they do, but by private companies. And we believe that these private companies will continue to invest in different arts because their rate of return will be still really great. They will have direct benefit from what they do, which will be really good for them. So yeah, they will continue to develop art, and artists themselves will benefit from this. Also, the companies which invest in artists will have a positive image of the company. Also, we know that if an artist is really good, then he will be noticed by different companies which will want to invest in them. And for example, they will be part of some kind of adverts which will get extra money. So we believe that if we stop funding, and by funding I mean the payment from the government to these artists, then the artists will still have what to do and even to develop because the private sector will be the most important investor in our case. For example, let's say about painters, about sculptors. Well, they actually don't get you know a salary or a specific wage for a particular period of time because it is not really, they are not subsidized to make, for example, a particular painting because they just have to be inspired to do this. And when they create a masterpiece, then if they are really good, then they will sell this painting, for example, and they'll get a lot of money from this, and this way they'll be able to develop. So in this state funding isn't really something important, so yes, we will start it. And the same applies with sculptors and what they do. Then about like what we said, the singers. Well, most of the singers, yes.
Would you, as a private investor, invest in a completely unknown artist if you had no idea whether you would get a return on your investment or not?
Well, actually, when you do something really good, for example, there are artists which started, for example, they uploaded videos in YouTube, for example, singers. And for example, Justin Bieber, who became really famous now, which is one of the most famous male artists on the global scene. Well, he uploaded videos on YouTube, and he was noticed by artists and singers. I mean, also who is already very famous, and he saw his potential and his talent, and he decided to invest in him. So state funding actually, in this case, didn't really matter because then he was just help with the financial support, of a private company. So yes, we believe that there are ways for people to show what their potential is, that they are talented, and to be noticed. And yes, people, private companies will know that if a singer is good, that they will invest in him, that there will be a rate of return, and this is what we are going to prove, what we are proving today. So the next thing is that. For example, actors, which are really, for example, if you're a really good actor and uh, a private company or any kind of investor or something from the very public that you're performing your play and see that you're really good, then this investor will want you to get involved in a particular advertisement, which will in turn get more money for the artist itself, and also will make the artist more famous, which will be really good, and he will be able to develop. And even then, he will not perform only in theaters, but he will perform in different movies, in international movies, and he will become more famous, which will be really good. So we believe that state funding here is not a factor. So we believe that if we stop this funding for payment of art, there will be no significant change, and the arts will still develop. No, thank you. So, and let's talk about the opera singers, who which is pretty much the same thing. Because, for example, the Italian opera singer, Luciano Pavarotti, well, he actually he does not only perform in a particular opera, for example, but he made different songs with pop artists, and he, for example, he made a song with the Spice Girls, and then he some kind of integrated in what modern art is, and he was even he got even more famous, and this way private companies saw this, and then they wanted to sell even more records from his performances, and also by doing this, we will increase the competition between in arts, because if the album is really good, if an act is really good, then there will be this competition whether a private company should subside this one or this one, which will be really good for the art itself. So we believe that starting from the funding is really good, and our second speaker will tell you about the more benefits of it. Thank you.
And the speaker for remarks. I would like now to call upon the first speaker of today's opposition, Tola, to deliver her speech of stand.
Ladies and gentlemen, your chair and indicators, I would like you to imagine a little boy born and raised in a lower class family in a poor suburban area. In his neighborhood, he has normally no other access to arts other than cheap cinema and cheap magazines. Yet, through state-funded initiative, this boy is able to take free lessons on the violin. He's introduced to classic music genius such as Chopin and Beethoven and Mozart, and through state funding, he is given the access to a new creative and inspiring world of arts that he would never have seen otherwise. And that is what is going to be our team line. We're going to argue for the fact that without state funding, the inequalities in society will surely widen, and we believe that that is wrong. But first off, I would like to start with some rebuttal. The team proposition says that without state funding, there would be no significant difference because the private market will surely take over. We believe that, of course, there's good to have a private market. State funding does not mean that there's no private market. Of course not. However, we believe that the initiative to perhaps, invest in museums or educational initiatives isn't there with only a private market. We believe that it is not in the best interest of perhaps private investors to invest in such things, and therefore we would like to leave that to states. Secondly, proposition talked about how people can be discovered. For example, if there's an actor and he plays in a play and then is discovered by a private investor in the audience. Sure, that could happen, absolutely, and that would be really good to happen. However, a lot of plays are state funded, and how would an actor be discovered from the beginning if the state funding wasn't there and the play didn't exist in the first place? So we believe that in order for there to be a full cultural climate, we need to have state funding. I'm going to now move on a little bit to my more substantial argument. Because without state-funded arts, we can see tremendous amounts of inequality in society. Because there has always been a history and a culture of the upper class enjoying the arts, sort of that rich people, for hundreds of years, the arts have been for the rich people, going to the theater, going to the opera, going to museums, etc. And we believe that if you remove state funding, it's going to be very hard for the working classes to be able to partake in the arts and such cultures, simply because the private market is going to be more expensive to partake in arts, because with government funding and state funding, we can make it a lot cheaper. We can subsidize certain things, subsidize museums, films. The state can sponsor films from other parts of the world where private investors would absolutely not be interested, because we believe that there's a tendency for private investors to only want to focus on the things that would become the most popular instead of what is most educational. We want the arts to be able to be available to everybody. So with subsidizing, for example, tickets to theaters are given to poor schools so they can take their classes to get some education. Scholarships for artists from the working class that would have no other way of showing their art or their music or whatever it is that they do. And we believe that, we really believe that equality is important for a democratic nation to prosper. Humans are born equal no matter where in society they are, and of course we believe that they should be given the exact same opportunities. And with taking away state funding, it would be so much harder for the working classes to get through and see all this art. And when you take away the rights from some people, when you give some people more possibilities in life, in this area we're going to lose, for example, a lot of talent and culture and history, because everyone having access to art means endless possibilities. A few examples. You take school trips to art museums, and the art museum wouldn't even be there if the government hadn't subsidized it. The trip wouldn't happen if the government hadn't subsidized it. Because we believe that there's not enough incentive for people on the private market to invest in such things. You could take cheap dance classes, for example, because we believe dance is a form of art, and it's a musical education in school. And overall, we believe that you get sort of more psychological help from being able to partake in all of this art, simply because art is such an enriching thing. Art is a way of educating the people, as I've said, through museums. We can learn about the past, we can learn about the present, and we can learn about the future as well. We can see, what developments has been made in art. We can look at, depictions of wars and stuff that we would never be able to have access to that and otherwise. And exploring our cultural heritage is, an incredibly good way to better understand why we act the way we do, why we have this place on the earth, etc. Yes?
Why do you think that cultural heritage is part of art?
We definitely believe that cultural heritage is part of art. For example, if you have a museum full of historical artifacts from different parts of the world, then you get to understand sort of, this is the way people acted in, for example, another continent in this and that time. And we believe that that is a very important way for us to discover our humanity and why we act the way we do. And as well as the fact that art is important for entertainment, of course. You know, it's not all about education perhaps, but it's, you know, going to the theater is really nice. It's, I would say this again, it's a very enriching thing to do, and we believe that it's very, very important for every single human to be able to partake in this. And as we've said, we agree with the proposition that a private market is absolutely, you know, we have a private market today, and the private market will continue to be there. So we're not saying that just because we have state funding, we would just, you know, completely remove the private market. But we're saying that state funding is definitely needed for there to be an incentive. State funding is definitely needed for there to be a full, you know, cultural range of things. So theater, classical music, independent films, art exhibitions, dancing, architecture, painting, experimental arts, educational arts, etc. These are all art forms that today are funded by the state. Forms of art that inspire human creativity, human happiness, art forms that we need to evolve, and we need to develop art forms that have art forms that should be accessible to everyone. We believe that it's very important that it's accessible to everyone. And with that, this House begs to propose this motion, and I would like to say that everyone deserves art, and state funding guarantees it. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speaker for her remarks. I would like to call on the second speaker for this proposition, Ivan, to continue the case from his side. Please welcome.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first I want to begin. We gave a definition of art in our first speech. That was how our first speaker started. He said that art is the way of people express themselves. You didn't say anything about this definition, so you just said that art is history, you know. But you said that art is like it's not like people who art is not something that people express themselves with. You said that art is a way of education, so we don't understand why you pointed that because we think you agree with our definition of art. And you said too that museums are going to be stopped, going to lose their funding, but museums are not funded by the art part of the state. You know, museums are funded by another, not by art funds or the finances that are given for art. They are funded from other public places. You know, they are too funded by.
Point, sir,
Yeah.
is an artwork by Picasso in a museum that's funded by the state not a form of art?
Yeah, but it's in a gallery, not a museum. You know, this is the difference. Museum is where you put your cultural heritage, and they are funded by the historical sector. And the Picasso paintings, there, yes.
Don't you think that maybe a painting from the 1200s is a form of art?
Yes, it's a form of art, but it's not held in a museum. You know, Leonardo da Vinci's painting is not in a museum. The best paintings of the world are put in galleries, not in museums. And museums are funded from the historical case, not from funded from the historical part of the public of the state sector. You gave a little example. Imagine a little boy who lives in a little city with cheap cinema, but there is no way to find his talent. But just imagine something else. Firstly, by stopping public funding of arts, we by no means want to stop funding of education art. You know, educational sector is another sector. We are going to continue funding arts education, but we are going to stop paying salaries. We are going to stop the payment of the salary payment to the actors, to the musicians, and so on. You said about the boy who needs to go to violin lessons. But violin lessons are not connected if the boy lives in a little town with cheap cinema, there will be no way to go to violin lessons because the main purpose of the town is to develop their economy. Because I don't know if you're familiar with the pyramid of Maslow. You know, Maslow is a psychologist. He lives in America. He gave the he gave a social pyramid which describes the thing that if you don't have your fundamental needs if you don't have shelter, you don't have food, you cannot evolve spiritually. And art is something that is spiritual. You know, you can't understand art, you can't develop art if you don't have your fundamental needs. So this boy with the little boy, even if he lives in such a small town, he cannot develop this because he has some more important things to think about than art. He has to find himself better workplace, he has to find himself a lot of other things. Now, and when we set the examples with Luciano Pavarotti, we mean that the public sector will invest in opera singers because they are now in the concept of modern time. You know, they are in a lot of you know, Luciano Pavarotti made a duet with 5 girls, if I can express myself like that. He's in the concept of modern time. A lot of people watching, and by that, the public sector wants to invest in them. You know, if the public sector wants to invest in the best musicians, the competition will increase, and by that, only the best musicians will stay. Only the best of them will be funded, and will be inspired. And as we said, we are not stopping and will be encouraged, not inspired, I'm sorry, encouraged to sing and to develop their talent. And when we said we are not stopping the funding for arts education, I mean that because when there is no way to stop the education of art, you know, and other public sectors will go to the art schools like they do now, and we'll find these talents, and the best of them will be funded. And so with the funding of the best talents, the competition will increase, as I said, and only the best singers will be on the big stage. For the other kinds of art, like sculptures and paintings, some painters are such geniuses that they even don't need education. But those they do, they can give they can make their art public by painting them in the centers of some big cities. I mean, a lot of people are using like sand art. They're drawing on the sand by the oceans, and they are attracting a lot of public. So this is a great way of advertisement, and the public sector will want to invest in them. By that, they will develop. This is another concept of art. And the other concept of art, I mean paintings, they are not given money for painters to work like painters. Their paintings are sold on auctions, you know, and because we are stopping the salaries of the public sector, we are not stopping the education or the building maintenance. We are stopping only the salaries. By that, painters will have this will have no influence on painters, on sculptures, or on different kinds of art. We said that no one wants to invest in someone, but just take for example Justin Bieber's investment. When Usher wanted to invest it in him, the private investor had no idea what will become from Justin Bieber, but now he's a star. For the economical market to evolve, you have to take risks. And there is no, we can have no other way for investment if we don't take risks. So this is a part of the market. And what we're going to do with the money that we stop, we're going to invest in the problem sectors. You know, investing in the problem sectors, we'll have better the whole world. And by bettering the economy, we're going to better our life standard. By bettering our life standard, we're going to cover our fundamental needs in the pyramid of Maslow. And when we cover our fundamental needs with the investment of the other, when we invest this money in the other sectors, we're going to evolve in a much higher level. Evolving in a higher level, we're going to understand a much more bigger concept of art and start developing other concepts of art. and by that we will develop as art as all in all its kinds, and the best of the best artists will still stay on the public view. Thank you.
Speaker, his remarks. I would like now to call for the second speaker, the artist Oliver, to indicate from this side. Please welcome.
A little girl dances in front of a mirror. Her dance teacher spurs her on, pushing her to her limits, and a smile bursts across her face. She is as happy as she will be this week. Her mother may be jobless, her father may be in hospital, but here she can be happy, here she can get that. Here, paid by the state, she is happy. In this speech, I will try to prove to you how this little girl would not be happy without the arts being state-funded, and why unknown artists would not be realized without the power of state funding. But first, I would like to reply to some points made by the proposition. I would like to start with the proposition's definition of the arts, that the arts is a way of expressing themselves. What the proposition has stated is that art museums are not forms of art. I would like to point, first of all, to the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, displaying art from the most known names around the world in one place. This is a museum of modern art. What the proposition has stated is that museums are not art, and therefore stated that all of these paintings should not be funded, and that state-funded museums should not be funded. Another example, for example, the head of Tutankhamun, displayed in a museum. Was not the head of Tutankhamun created as an expression, as a form of expressing their culture, as a form of expressing themselves and expressing their love for their pharaoh, and therefore a form of art, and in a museum? What the proposition has stated is that this is not art. What the proposition is therefore saying is that this should effectively be scrapped, since it states that it should not be state funded. I would also like to point out the fact that the proposition is denying the fact that the dance classes funded by the state are a form of expressing themselves. For example, the little girl I mentioned in my introduction. Is the smile across her face not a way of showing that she is expressing herself, that she is expressing her art, and that she can even go on, thanks to this state-funded program, to become a dancer in a well-renowned theatre, for example, and then express herself and spread her art onto others, and the happiness here and the expression which they themselves have defined onto others. What the proposition is saying is that the education that we have mentioned here is not art. We beg to differ and we beg to oppose. I would like to finally refer to the proposition's case on that no one would want to invest in things that aren't talent, and they point to examples such as Justin Bieber, who showed his talent and therefore was funded by the private sector. We're not saying that funding by the private sector is bad. We're saying that state funding is required to realize the potential of artists that don't get the opportunity that Justin Bieber had, that don't get the opportunity to be realized by a massive multinational corporation. We're saying that state funding is required for movies such as Sugar Man, a recent movie which showed and realized the potential of an artist who was long forgotten. This movie was solely state-funded, and it would not have got the funding of a private company because the people involved in making it were unexperienced and they were unknown to private multinational corporations which would have funded such a thing. What the proposition is stating is that projects such as these would not be funded in any way possible because the private investors that invest in this art would not go for what they know, go for what is popular, and not take ventures into the unknown, and not realize the unknown potential of artists. I would like to move on to this House's final argument today. And what we ask is why the arts needs state funding. To prove this, I must first ask why the arts are important in society. Arts educate societies. They make people think. They make people reflect over what they do. They can make people realize the history of peoples through paintings, which this proposition has denied by stating that, for example, the Museum of Modern Art is not a form of art. It can make people laugh. It can make people smile through comedy. It makes people happy by reflecting, smiling, educating, thinking. The job of any government is to make people happy, as people enjoy being happy, and the people vote for governments, making the government want to make people happy, as it's the government's job to serve the people. The second question I ask myself is, how are artists made? Many, if not in almost all cases, artists are made by the education of artists. Artists, in most cases, develop as artists and explore art as children. Schools of dance, movie making, schools of art, schools of drama, schools of music, all of which in many nations is state funded. When children are given inspiration within the arts, they both become happy themselves and also potentially grow up to become artists and spread their happiness and art onto others, making others happy. Artists are made by inspiring young children. And how do we inspire young children? We state fund the education of young artists. So why is state funding required to create artists? And we ask ourselves, what's the other option? In private funding, only those who can afford it can pay for their children to be inspired and pay for their children's happiness. Proof that everyone deserves it, and everyone does. Without state funding, the little girl that I talked about would not be happy and would not grow up to be a dancer and spread her happiness. And that, my friends, is why state funding is needed. Finally, I ask, how does state funding realize the potential of unknown artists, as I was explaining before, but I would like to elaborate on that. People who come from money, people who get the attention of international privately funded corporations, yes, they will succeed. Yes, they will become privately funded, but we ask about those who do not. Especially special forms of art, However, there is so much potential talent out there that can't be privately funded because of it being completely unknown. On the other hand, if everyone who wants to gets the opportunity, everyone is given the same chance, which can realize the unknown potential caused by the spread of culture and education and happiness, and therefore should be state funded. What we ask the opposition today to prove to us is, how would these artists be realized otherwise? How would these unknown artists be realized? And what we would also like to ask the proposition is, how would these children otherwise get access to the arts? I would like to finish by stating, everyone deserves art, and state funding guarantees this. Thank you very much.
Remarks. So we'd now like to call on the last constructive speaker of this proposition, Slavina, to continue the case for her slide.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start with a little clarification on our definitions. We said that art is a way of expressing ourselves, and we clearly stated that we're going to talk about music, movies, opera, ballet, and all these arts that we know. And one of the questions in this debate was the fact that the opposition talked about museums and education. In our two speeches, we never stated that we're going to stop money, the money for the buildings where the art is made, like or is situated and exposed, like museums, or the money for education in our schools. We never said that. As team proposition, we propose that we're going to stop the money for salaries of the different artists, because the museum is not a form of art. In the museum, there may be an exposition of art, but the building itself is not an art. And that is why we're not stopping money for keeping the buildings in good shape, and the fact that they're going to be good for visitations. We're only stopping the salaries for the arts that I have already stated. Also, in your speech, I'm sorry, the question debate on doing clashes was the fact that in your speech you talk about equality between people. But we believe that if we stop state funding, there is going to be equality, and I'll explain why. If we stop the money for state money for art, these money are going to be used for more important problems and global problems. These like hunger or health or healthcare. And we believe that if we do that, the standard of living will increase. This will lead to more money for the people, because their standard of life will be higher, and they will have more money to give for arts. And we believe that by doing this, by stopping the state money for arts and using them for global issues, will increase the standard of life, and by doing this, we'll really be able to get the equality and the opportunity for everyone to educate from arts, or to just enjoy arts.
Point, madam.
Yes, please.
So what would happen to all the theatres that are state funded? Would they just close down?
I already explained that the building itself will not be closed. The state will continue to fund the funding of the buildings, but they will not give salaries to the people who work there. Also, you said that other clash was the fact that because we gave you the example of Justin Bieber, how he was discovered by a private investor, the singer Usher, and you said that not everyone has the opportunity, have an opportunity like Justin Bieber. But we already said in our first argument that one of the benefits of the model that we're suggesting by stopping the state money for art will be that there is going to be a competition. If you're more talented and you will deserve to get the money from the private investor, and that is why everyone can have can post their video on YouTube. Everyone can express their art even without paying, and they will be seen. And the private investor will decide if this person is talented enough and if he deserves the funding. Also, you said that it's a risk, and that this risk will not be taken by the private sector. But we do not believe that it's true, because this risk will not be taken by the states, because countries, they cannot accept risks when they give money, and they will not fund some young like musicians or artists at all. But the private sector will do that, and that is our benefit from our model, because this, the state funding will only will not fund like new artists, and they will only give money for artists that are already proven. And we believe that the private sector can also do that, and the money from the private sector are going to be bigger. In our speeches, we already said about the pyramid of Maslow, which is connected to the fact that if you cannot cover your basic needs like shelter and food, you cannot reach the highest levels. We believe that some people don't have enough money to even buy food. In counseling, we even talk about visiting, going to the theater, or really be interested in art when these people, they do not have their basic needs and they cannot reach the highest level of these interests. And that is why we believe that it will be better for this state money to be spent on global problems and global issues that are going to really secure the basic needs of the people. And by doing this, they will, when they have their basic needs, they will be able to really understand and accept art. Also, in our second argument, we talk about in our two arguments, we talk about the fact that some of the private sector really is more beneficial. I already stated that about the competition between the artists, because we believe that state funding is not efficient enough. They give money and but this money are not enough. They do not help for the art to continue developing, because they are not investing in young artists, and that is why we believe that the private sector is more appropriate. And in conclusion, I would like to say that the main point of the team opposition was equality, but we believe that equality cannot be reached if we continue the funding of arts by the state. If the funding for arts is the state, because the private sector will really be better, will help for the better development, for the better developing of arts, while the state funding will secure the basic needs of the people and will really help them understand and accept art. And that is why, as team proposition, we believe that this House will stop state funding of arts. Thank you.
I think the speakers for more remarks. So now on the last speaker of today's opposition, either 50 leadership for that side. Please welcome.
Now, in my free time, I like to sing. That is because in my town where I live, there's a club where you can go and sing, an organization who will teach me how to sing. And why can I do that? Well, because the state funds that. They don't sponsor me as a singer. They sponsor the organization. The organization then teaches me. And that is exactly how the state functions. Throughout this debate, the proposition has made it seem as if that state actually pays artists to do what they do. No, they spend money to give artists the means to improve, the means to make it on their own. And that is exactly what the state is trying to do to me, at least. So when we get to this, for one of the clashes that we've been confronting in this debate, whether art actually has educational value, and we've spoken about are museums really part of this debate? Does that have educational value? We say yes, because this is the actual effects of the arts. This is what the state actually invests in. They invest in museums that works as a means for people to learn from culture and learn from art. So that's the educational value of this. And they invest in organizations that improve people to paint or to dance or to act. And that's what we've been talking about throughout this debate. So there seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding on that part. So that's what actually affects the arts on people, and that in turn leads to education. So that's what we've been talking about. The message that art proclaims, and that's what the state sponsors, not necessarily the artist, him or herself. So does art have educational value? Well, yes, we say. And why is that? Because the proposition they try to refer to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they're saying that before people have these fundamental rights, they will not appreciate that. we beg to differ. We say that art can fundamentally get people out of poverty because it has this educational force. Because as our first speaker spoke of, art can teach people about cultural heritage, it teaches us about history, it can make the difference for a singer between just singing for him or herself and actually being a famous artist, actually having that as a career. So we believe that this is a major investment work that the state is obliged to actually invest in, something that the proposition does not seem to agree with. And back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which basically deals with happiness. How are human beings feeling fulfilled? We still believe that arts is a fundamental part of it. But it's because arts has this educational value that can take you all the way to the top of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and actually feel fulfilled. But now the major clash that I would like to talk about during my speech is the one of, do investors actually invest in the people who are the most talented? And I think that this has been the core clash in this debate. Because the proposition claimed that investors will always be searching for the people with the most talent, and that's what they will be investing in. And now we, on the opposition, we think that that sounds like a brilliant idea. However, we are realistic. We know that that is not how it works. If you look at economic strategy and psychology, we know that investors will not invest in risky deals, and they will not invest in a person who has not yet shown any kind of signs of actually being successful. In other words, the examples that were brought up of Rihanna and Beyonce receiving funding, of course they are, because they're big names, and investors know that investing in them, having them in commercials, will give great returns. So we do not think that they are valid. Yes?
When they were invested in the first place, they weren't famous. How can you really explain the fact that they were invested by the private sector when they weren't famous?
They weren't invested to the same extent before they were famous. And if we take one step back further, what made these people famous? Perhaps they took singing classes, perhaps they were taught, and these are the most important part of them actually being famous today. No, thank you. And the same with the proposition spoke of Justin Bieber. Now, Justin Bieber, he managed through just uploading videos onto YouTube. But what about the people who don't have computers? What about the people who don't have these huge social networks that are actually required today? Because we, on the opposition, think that, well, maybe the proposition's case could actually work if you have either a lot of money or a huge social network where you could actually make your voice heard. But that is a minority, and we still believe that we should support the majority in this case. Because if you have these possibilities, of course you can make a big name and you can grow, etc., etc. But however, it is easier said than done. So we are being more realistic in this debate, we believe. Sure.
Can you give me one example of a singer who is publicly funded?
Who is publicly funded?
Yes.
Well, everyone is publicly funded to start with. I mean, taking singing classes, for example, may be subsidized by the government, and that is the first step to actually becoming famous. So I would say that basically all singers have started by being publicly funded somehow. And then of course people will invest with you as we proceed. And this brings me to a point that I would like to highlight. Nowhere throughout this debate have we, the opposition, proposed the ideas of private investments. We think that they're great. However, we believe that there must be some kind of basis, that you must start somewhere. So now, when you're actually a big artist, of course it's great if you can make it on your own. You can be in commercials and get a lot of money. However, that will happen once you're actually famous. We want to see a model where everyone can start on their own and actually take the first step forward. And that's where the state plays a big part. Because what if you don't have the technological devices that are actually needed to make it? What if you don't know enough people, you don't have the money? There's so many factors that can keep you from actually being successful. No, thank you. Being successful within the business. And that's where the state must play the big role to actually help people take that first step into the business. So, in other words, we're not against private investments. We're just saying that they can coexist, but first and foremost, there must be a basis that will help these indie artists who have not just yet made it, even though they may be the most talented. Because we do not believe that investors are actually always looking for the greatest talents. No, they're looking to earn money. And they will always be looking, where can I earn the most money? And indie artists are indeed risky at first, and the government does have the means to actually invest in them when they're still considered risky. So that's what we've been arguing today. And going back to some of the arguments mentioned earlier by the opposition, we still stand strong that the people should, that the public, that the arts legislature should not be limited, that everyone should have access to the same amount. And that is done through museum, and that is done through the education that the art actually conveys, something that the proposition has completely ignored. They're saying that this is not part of this debate. However, we beg to differ. We think that this is a fundamental part of the debate, because that is where the state will actually invest. So we would like to see that being addressed by the proposition as soon as possible. And back to the indie artist debate, we still do not believe that investors will have any kind of interest in investing if we consider artists to be too risky. Hence, we do not think that the model that the proposition has put forward today is realistic, because they will not take these risks. And for this, I would like to say that everyone deserves art, and state funding is the only means that can guarantee that. Thank you.
I would now like to call upon the first 5 speakers and the opposition to facilitate for the slide. Please welcome on the motion.
I would like to look at a future that the proposition proposes. A future without the public, without state funding of the arts. I would like to look at all those unrealized artists that are never found because of the only select few selected by large private companies. Now, this is what the proposition has believed throughout the debate. What the proposition has stated is that again and again, is that through the competition between different artists, the best ones will be realized and the best ones will be paid for privately. What we've said again and again is that, sure, that's great that those ones are realized, but there are also many, many others that aren't realized and can't be realized by private companies because of risky investment. We've also stated that these artists wouldn't even have got the basis to be realized without the education, in many cases, funded by the state. Now, first of all, I would like to take up the questions that I asked at the end of my speech. First of all, how would these artists be realized how would these unknown artists be realized without public funding? And what the proposition has done is that they've only been, again and again, they've only been stating that these larger artists will be funded privately, but again and again, they've denied the rights of these smaller artists. They've denied the rights of these more risky investments. I would also like to point to the fact that the proposition stated very clearly that they would never stop the funding of museums, that they would keep funding the buildings. Now, what the proposition is doing here is that since they're funding the buildings, they are therefore funding the art in the buildings, and therefore they are for that the state should pay for the art. This in itself has proven that the proposition is in a way for the funding of arts. What the proposition has also stated, what we must also ask, the second question I asked myself was, how would these children otherwise get access to the arts? That's what I asked in the end of my speech. And what the proposition has also stated was that they would never cut the funding from education. They would never cut the funding from education such as these. And again, they are funding the arts. They are funding the arts that takes place in this education. And the proposition has proposed that state funding should, in fact, fund the arts. What the opposition side, again and again, has been emphasizing is that the private sector can coexist with the public sector, that the private sector can realize talent, but that the public sector, the state sector, is required for those who don't get the opportunity to be friends with Usher and be realized because of that. What we again and again have been stating is that the private sector realizes talent, but the state realizes the unknown talent that it can't. What we've again and again been stating is that for everyone to get the opportunity to experience art found in museums, found in theatres, found everywhere, we must fund it with the state sector. And therefore, I would like to finish my case. I would like to finish the case of the opposition by stating that again, everyone deserves art, and the state guarantees it. Thank you.
And speaker for his remarks. I would now like to recognize the last required speaker to show the debate for their side and debate the whole. Please welcome yourself.
I'd like to start with lyrics from a song from Eminem, Snap Back to Reality. Let's snap back to reality. You said that the little girl is happy when she can play a violin, and a little boy in his town which has a cheap cinema, and the state will fund its education. But just think for a second. You gave your personal example that in your town you have a club where you can sing, but your country is a wealthy country. Let's take your example of the boy in the small town with the cheap cinema. Do you think that in one small town, in one country that is not developed, the state will fund free education? They won't have these money to get to them. If we go into the reality, countries that don't have enough money to develop art will not give this free education because they have other needs. Because it's not better for the people to stay hungry than to develop an art. Countries that don't have countries that are not developed will invest in the sector to better the life standard, then to invest in art. Like we said, this is the pyramid of Maslow. You talked about that investor. You talked about economical strategies. Well, the economicals, if we are talking about economical strategy, you have to take an interest that every economy risks, because for evolving, you need to take risks, because it's not it's the innovations that bring the money, and not something else. And to have some new stuff, to have something innovative, you need to risk to get it. I mean, yeah. And you said, how will the state fund other people? How will the state fund people who don't have computers? Well, just think for a second, people that don't have computers live in the third world. And in the third world, there is no state funding for arts education because they have a lot of other problems. Just take for example Nigeria. Do you think that in Nigeria they are taking free violin lessons in school? Because I'm not sure about Nigeria, but in some places they don't even have schools. In places where they don't have computers, you don't have state-funded free education, and that's why we're snapping back to reality. Because in reality, in places where we don't have computers, don't have free education. You have free education only in wealthy countries, and in wealthy countries, for the pyramid of Maslow, your fundamental needs are covered, and you can evolve in some other, and you can evolve and develop art. The other thing that you said about museums, but we said that we are not going to stop funding for museums. That was our point. We are not going to stop funding for the buildings. And if we snap back to reality for the second time, we will understand that if you want to go to the museum, you have to pay. And let's go back to these countries that are not developed. Let's go back to the countries where don't have enough money to pay to go to a museum. Firstly, we have to cover our fundamental needs. That is what we are trying to tell you. If we don't have money to go to a museum, how are we going to go there? Because state-funded museums are not free, you know. Even if the museums are state-funded, you have to pay to go to them. And what we take, for example, a country from the third world. Okay, what are going to do they to go to a museum when they don't have money even to leave their country? That's the problem. And if you said that it will be a global, by your model, you'll cover all global needs. But if we go back to reality, like you said in your speeches, this will not be appropriate. Thank you.